Hello everyone. In my last lecture, I was talking about Pascal's treatise on the equilibrium of fluids, and I talked about how he was explaining Pascal's principle by using the idea that each little piece of fluid exerts a force on each adjacent piece of fluid. So before I go on to his third explanation of Pascal's principle, let me remind you, let me go back here, let me get a different color ink. So we're talking about Pascal's principle. I'll remind you what Pascal's principle is. Pascal's principle says that, I'll just write down the formula, force out over force in equals A out over A in. That was Pascal's principle. And I explained how this arises. So in the last lecture, I explained how it can be derived from the forces exerted by each element of fluid on adjacent fluid elements. And before I go on to explain another way of deriving Pascal's principle, I think it's probably worthwhile to pause and think a little bit harder about what's going on. So this is a little bit of review, but it's also maybe introducing some new concepts. So I want you to think about a large chamber of fluid. I'm going to draw this large fluid chamber. To make it easy, I'm going to have a cubical chamber like this. And I want you to imagine that there is a cubical tube, I guess square cross-section tube sticking out of this side, like this. And imagine that there is a piston in this side that is able to slide forward and backward. Get rid of this for the moment. So this right here, let's suppose that the cross-sectional area is 1 square inch. And let me get this back. Let me draw forces in orange. So let's suppose we apply a force equal to 1 pound. So we apply 1 pound of force to this piston. Let me draw a line right here. Okay. So when we apply this force of 1 pound to this fluid in this chamber, using this piston, each little piece of fluid in this chamber feels a force of 1 pound on each side. So let me draw a little piece of fluid. I'm going to draw a 1 cubic inch piece of fluid that's right at the end of this. Of course, this entire region is filled with fluid, but I want you to think about what's happening on each piece of fluid. So for equilibrium, that is, if none of the fluid in this chamber is moving, each 1 cubic centimeter volume of fluid feels a force of 1 pound on each of its 1 square inch sides. So this little cube of fluid right here, it has a 1 pound force on its left side, its right side, its top, its bottom, and so on, and that is how it's sitting in equilibrium, right? Now, you also have to keep in mind that each 1 cubic centimeter volume of fluid exerts a 1 pound force on whatever is adjacent to it, or whatever is next to it. So this little piece of fluid right here, this that I've drawn in blue, is exerting a force of 1 pound on each fluid element that's next to it. This could be either fluid or the walls of the chamber. Okay, so why is this significant? Well, let's suppose on the other side of the chamber you have another opening, but this is a bigger opening. Okay, I'm going to draw another tube coming out on this side. Again, to make things simple, I'm going to draw this as a rectangular cross-section tube coming out on this side. And let's suppose that this piston is bigger, so that it is able to fit 4 cubic centimeters of fluid next to it. So I'm going to try to draw 4 cubic centimeters of fluid over here. It's a little bit tricky to draw this. Okay, so the point is that there are 4 cubic centimeters touching this one, and so each of those 4 cubic centimeters of fluid is exerting a force of 1 pound on this piston on this side. So each of these little ones is exerting a 1 pound force, 1 pound, 1 pound, 1 pound, and 1 pound. And so as a result, the force on the output side, so think about, I guess I didn't draw the piston here, but imagine there's a piston right here that's able to move. And if I don't want it to move, I have to resist this. But how big of a resistance do I have to apply to it? I have to apply a 4 pound force. So the force on the output side is going to be equal to 4 pounds because there are 4 cubic volumes of fluid that are in contact with it. So the force on the input side is 1 pound of force, and the force on the output side is 4 pounds of force. And it strictly follows from how these forces of interaction are transmitted through this fluid filling this entire chamber. So I guess it's useful at this point to introduce the concept of pressure. So if we think about each little piece of fluid, I'm going to draw a little piece of fluid over here just because it's easier and I don't want to complicate my drawing. Each little piece of fluid feels a force of 1 pound on each side. I'm not going to draw the force on each side, just I'm going to draw a few of these forces. There's 1 pound of force pushing on each side of this piece of fluid from the top, the bottom. I guess I'm going to draw them on each side, 1 pound on each side, like this. And when that's the case, what we do is we typically say that the pressure that this piece of fluid is under is equal to the force that is exerted on each area of this cube. So we would say that the pressure is equal to 1 pound per square inch. That is, if each of these sides has 1 square inch of area, we would say that this cube has a pressure of 1 pound per square inch. So it's probably worthwhile introducing this concept at this point, the concept of pressure. And it's going to help us to think about these sorts of situations.